Homeowners associations are supposed to make neighborhoods safer, cleaner, and better organized. In theory, they exist to protect property values. But anyone who has ever dealt with a power-hungry HOA board member knows that theory doesn't always match reality. In my case, that board member was Karen, our HOA president who treated the community like her personal kingdom. She walked around with a permanent scowl, a clipboard, and what she called her master key, which she claimed was necessary to inspect common property whenever she wanted. In truth, Karen loved to snoop, intimidate, and remind everyone that she believed she was in charge. For months, I had been her favorite target. It started small, a warning letter about improper trash and placement, then a fine for excessive weeds when I had exactly 2 dandelions in the yard. Eventually, she moved on to more absurd claims. Unapproved curtains visible from the street, noise violations when my family wasn't even home, and even accusations of hosting unauthorized guests whenever relatives visited. The constant harassment became exhausting. I tried to stay calm, hoping she would get bored and move on, but she never did. Then came the day everything changed. I returned home from work early to find Karen on my porch, crouched over my doorknob. In her hand was a shiny silver key. I froze for a moment, stunned that she was trying to open my front door in broad daylight. She looked so sure of herself, jiggling the key as if she had every right to be there. When it wouldn't turn, her expression shifted from confidence to irritation. She shoved the key in harder, rattling the door handle like she could force it to obey her. I didn't make a sound. I simply stood there, half hidden by the big oak tree in my yard, and watched. My phone was in my hand, recording every second. Karen muttered under her breath, glancing over her shoulder to make sure no one was around. She clearly believed she was untouchable. After a few failed attempts, she stepped back and glared at my door like it had personally offended her. Then she whipped out her phone. What I didn't know yet was that Karen had another trick up her sleeve. Her husband, Officer Dan, was a local cop with a reputation for backing up his wife no matter what. Whenever Karen felt challenged, she used him as her personal enforcer. And this time, she was about to call him. But here's what she didn't know. My son Ethan worked as a dispatcher at the police department. He had just started his shift when Karen placed the call. I watched her pacing back and forth, waving her arms dramatically while she talked. Even from a distance, I could guess her story. She'd probably claim I was violating HOA rules, acting suspicious, or refusing entry for an inspection. She always had a way of twisting reality to fit her narrative. Meanwhile, I texted Ethan a quick heads up, sending him the short video clip of Karen trying to unlock our door. Within minutes, Karen stopped pacing and stood proudly at the end of my driveway, as if preparing to greet an ally. Sure enough, a patrol car appeared around the corner. My stomach tightened when I saw who was driving. It was Dan. Karen practically strutted toward him as he parked, her face lit up with righteous fury. She was ready to make an example of me. I stayed hidden behind the tree, watching and listening. Karen pointed toward my door, speaking fast and loud, clearly spinning her version of events. Dan's expression shifted from curiosity to anger, like he was already convinced I was in the wrong. But then his radio crackled. He paused to listen. It was Ethan's voice, calm, professional, and completely unexpected by his stepmother's tone. Karen didn't realize her stepson had already been briefed. She didn't know that the video of her attempting to open my door had just been logged in the dispatch system. She didn't know Ethan had already marked the situation as possible trespassing by HOA member, no homeowner requests. From where I stood, I saw Dan's expression change. First confusion, then irritation, not at me, but at his wife. Karen kept talking, pointing, and gesturing toward my house, but now Dan was barely responding. He glanced up toward the tree where I stood, as if he sensed I was there. I stepped out slowly, phone still recording. The look on Karen's face was priceless. Her triumphant smirk disappeared, replaced by something tight and nervous. She hadn't expected me to show up in person. She certainly hadn't expected me to be calm, silent, and holding evidence. Dan shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware that this was not the open and shut case his wife had promised. That's when Karen made her biggest mistake yet. Frustrated that the key hadn't worked and angry that Dan wasn't immediately cuffing me, she declared loudly that as HOA president she had every right to enter any home to ensure compliance. The words hung in the air like poison. Dan froze. I could see the realization hit him. Karen wasn't just bending the truth. She was openly admitting to criminal trespass. The neighborhood was suddenly alive with curious eyes peeking from behind curtains and doorways. Phones were coming out. Whispers spread fast. And Karen, too blinded by her own arrogance, didn't notice any of it. She thought she was still in control. I didn't need to say a word. Ethan's voice on the radio spoke for me, confirming that the entire department was now aware of what was happening. Dan's face tightened as he realized how bad this looked. Not just for Karen, but for him as an officer responding to her false call. But Karen wasn't done yet. She snatched the radio mic from Dan's hand, shouting something about rogue dispatchers and family conspiracies. That was the moment Dan grabbed her wrist, pulling the mic away, his jaw clenched with quiet fury. The crowd watching from their porches grew. The scene was no longer just a neighbor dispute. It was a spectacle, and this was only the beginning. Karen had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. What she didn't yet know was that my son had already escalated the incident to his supervisor. The department was now fully aware that the HOA president had tried to break into a private home with a so-called master key. As Dan guided her reluctantly back toward their car, Karen shot me a glare that could have burned a hole through steel. This wasn't over. She was too proud, too angry, and too desperate to back down. The real battle was only just starting. The morning after Karen's failed attempt to open my door, the neighborhood buzzed with rumors. People had seen the whole scene unfold. Karen rattling my doorknob, her husband showing up in uniform, and a bizarre shouting match over his radio. Word spread faster than wildfire. By breakfast time, every mailbox on our street had a flyer announcing an emergency HOA board meeting, called by none other than Karen herself. The notice was dripping with self-importance. According to Karen, recent events have threatened community order, and unauthorized interference in HOA inspections must be addressed immediately. She made it sound like she was the victim, not the would-be trespasser caught red-handed. But I wasn't surprised. Karen had never admitted being wrong about anything in her life. That evening, I walked to the community clubhouse, my phone still loaded with a video of her failed break-in. Half the neighborhood had already gathered, whispering in small groups. Some avoided my eyes, unsure whether to take sides, while others gave me quiet nods of support. They had their own run-ins with Karen's master key, though none as blatant as mine. Karen entered like a queen taking her throne, wearing her HOA badge on a lanyard and clutching her clipboard like a weapon. Dan trailed behind her, still looking uneasy after yesterday's fiasco. His uniform was gone, replaced by civilian clothes, but his face carried the same grim tension. He clearly wanted no part of this meeting. Karen called the room to order with a sharp rap of her pen against the table. She launched into a speech about enforcing community standards, claiming that certain homeowners were obstructing routine compliance inspections. Her voice dripped with fake concern, but underneath was pure anger. She didn't mention my name at first, but everyone knew exactly who she meant. Then she pivoted to her favorite prop, the so-called master key. Karen proudly held it up, explaining that it allowed authorized access to every property in case of emergency. That word, emergency, made several people shift uncomfortably in their chairs. Karen made it sound like she was doing us all a favor, protecting the neighborhood from hazards we didn't even know we had. But her speech wasn't landing the way she hoped. Whispers spread through the crowd. People exchanged looks of disbelief. Finally, one brave neighbor raised his hand and asked the question everyone was thinking. Why were you trying to use that key on someone's house in broad daylight? Karen's face tightened. She claimed it was a routine inspection, that I had ignored multiple notices about a potential safety violation. I could see the lie forming even as she said it. She insisted she had every legal right to enter, HOA approval or not. That's when I stood up. The room went silent. I didn't speak, at least not yet. Instead, I held up my phone and played the video. Every failed jiggle of her key, every angry mutter under her breath, every incriminating second of footage. the room filled with gasps and murmurs. Karen's voice cracked as she tried to talk over the video, claiming it was taken out of context. But context didn't matter. The truth was plain for everyone to see. She wasn't performing an inspection. She was trying to break into my home. Dan sat stone-faced in the back of the room. He knew there was no way to spin this. If he defended her, he'd look complicit. If he stayed silent, Karen would be furious later. Either way, he was trapped. Karen doubled down, insisting the HOA bylaws granted her authority. But that was the fatal miscalculation. Another neighbor, a retired attorney, stood up and calmly explained that no HOA rule could ever override state trespassing laws. He reminded everyone that Karen could face criminal charges for what she'd done. The room turned on her. Questions flew from every corner. How many times had she used this key? Whose houses had she entered? Who even gave her the key in the first place? Karen stammered through weak excuses, claiming it was for emergencies only, but no one was by it anymore. By the time the meeting ended, Karen was visibly shaken. What she hoped would be a show of strength had turned into a public humiliation. She stormed out, muttering that certain people will regret this. Dan followed close behind, his jaw tight, clearly bracing himself for the fight they'd have once they got home. I left the clubhouse to a chorus of supportive whispers. Several neighbors thanked me for filming her. Others quietly admitted they'd long suspected Karen had been snooping, but were too afraid to confront her. But I knew Karen wasn't going to give up. She was angry, cornered, and desperate to save face. People like her don't back down. They lash out. Later that night, my son Ethan called. His voice was calm, but I could hear the concern underneath. He told me Karen had already tried to lodge a formal complaint at the police station, claiming I'd threatened her safety and tampered with official HOA business. Ethan's supervisors were already aware of her antics after seeing the video, but that didn't mean she'd stopped trying to twist the narrative. As I hung up the phone, headlights swept across my front yard. Karen's SUV rolled slowly past my driveway, pausing just long enough to make her point. A silent warning, a promise that she wasn't finished. I watched her taillights disappear into the night, and a cold certainty settled in. She was planning her next move, and this time, she'd make it even bigger. That night, another letter appeared taped to my door. Not mailed, not delivered by hand. Just slapped onto the glass with a piece of cheap masking tape, crooked and rushed. It wasn't a notice, it was a stack of them. 3 separate fines, backdated, each more ridiculous than the last. Unauthorized landscaping, improper mailbox maintenance, failure to maintain exterior harmony. The total was obscene, and it was clear Karen had stopped even pretending to follow HOA procedure. I stood there on the porch, holding the papers in my hand, feeling the chill of the night settle deep in my chest. This wasn't about rules anymore. This was punishment, retaliation. Across the street, I caught a shadow move in Karen's window. She was watching me, waiting to see my reaction. I didn't give her one. I simply folded the papers, went inside, and locked the door. But in the quiet of that moment, I knew she wasn't done. The fines were just the first blow. Something bigger was coming, and it wouldn't stop at paper threats.